Hi guys, welcome or welcome back. Thank you so much for being here, for all of your support. It's so greatly appreciated. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you haven't yet. It really helps me out, especially because I'm still such a small channel and because YouTube's not really a fan of the true crime community. So that really helps me to get my videos pushed out into the algorithm. With that, I hope everybody's having a great day and that you're all happy and healthy, and let's get started. Joshua Miktarian was born on September 27th, 1974 in Akron, Ohio, to parents Paul and Minda. He had a brother named Paul and a sister named Veronica. He loved rocking out with his band, riding motorcycles, and tailgating. He was an avid fan of all Cleveland sports and the Dallas Cowboys. He also loved talk radio and concerts. He was described as a very outgoing person who loved to socialize. He started his criminal law career working for the Uniontown Police Department before accepting a job as the second canine officer with his partner Baggio at the Twinsburg Police Department. Then, 11 years later, he went back to Uniontown Police Department part-time, along with working full-time at Twinsburg Police Department and along with owning a pizzeria in Sagamore Hills. He would meet and marry his wife Holly while on the job. Holly was a police officer for the Oakwood Police Department. One night, while Josh was on a police chase, Holly was called in for backup. They would meet at the scene and never look back. 3 months before his death, Holly would give birth to their first child, a daughter named Thea. A little after midnight, on July 13, 2008, 24-year-old Ashford Thompson and his friend picked up his girlfriend of 2 years, Danielle Robertson. They dropped the friend off, and then they drove to Rav's Creekside Tap and Grill. The bartender there recognized Thompson as a regular customer who would typically order one beer and never cause trouble. That night, the bartender said he served Thompson a single Budweiser draft at about 12:30 or 1 o'clock. A patron at the bar that night said that he saw a woman and a man who he later identified as Thompson and his girlfriend sitting at the bar that night. He said that he heard Thompson making angry comments. He goes on to say that Thompson was drinking a beer. He slammed his glass on the bar, saying that he looked pretty drunk. Then Thompson said to his girlfriend, "There's demons in me, and I will kill any one effer that threatens me. Nobody understands the shit I've done and am capable of doing. I can't even talk about it." Around 1:50 on July 13th, Officer Miktarian was en route to the Twinsburg Police Department. He was dressed in his uniform, he was driving a marked car, and his canine Baggio was with him. Officer Miktarian spotted Thompson's car. The music was blasting, and he suspected that Thompson was driving under the influence. Followed Thompson's car to his house. At about 1:55 in the morning, Officer Miktarian calls dispatch to report the traffic stop, and Miktarian pulls into Thompson's driveway behind him. He provides the license plate to dispatch, and about 2 minutes later, he calls for backup. The dispatcher runs the license plate, and her search reveals that the owner of the vehicle has a license to carry a concealed firearm. Just a few moments after Miktarian requests backup, the dispatcher reports, "The only thing I know is he has a right to carry." Officer Miktarian did not respond to her. Another officer hears Miktarian's backup request over the radio and figures there's probably something wrong. So he responds to Miktarian asking what he had, but Officer Miktarian did not answer. So Officer Quinn got into his cruiser and he left the scene with his lights and sirens on to go to Miktarian for backup. Moments later, this all happens really quickly. So moments later, the dispatcher receives a call from Thompson's next door neighbor who woke up to the sound of yelling outside her window, and then she hears popping sounds. The dispatcher relays the information to Officer Miktarian, but he still does not respond.
Of 25-year-old Ashford Thompson, but it now looks as though the trial will begin tomorrow. At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, the trial of an accused cop killer is expected to get underway. Ashford Thompson is accused of murdering Twinsburg police officer Joshua Miktarian on a Sunday morning in July of 2008. 33-year-old Miktarian was shot several times in the head during a routine traffic stop. Miktarian joined the force in 1997. He was the first Twinsburg police officer to ever be killed in the line of duty. Tomorrow, jury selection for Thompson is expected to get underway. In April 2009, he pled guilty to all of the charges, but a legal loophole allowed him to withdraw the plea. An entire week has been set aside for jury selection. Prosecutors and defense attorneys will start questioning a pool of 150 potential jurors. He's charged with aggravated murder. The Summit County prosecutor spoke to News Channel 5 just days after Miktarian was killed in the line of duty.
It is not part of the job of a police officer to be kicked, hit, spit on, or assaulted in any manner for doing their job. It certainly was not part of Officer Miktarian's job to give his life that Sunday morning, and it was not his job to leave behind a wife with no husband and a baby girl with no father.
Thompson could get the death penalty if he is convicted.
Officers quickly arrived at the scene. Officer Quinn arrived first and saw Miktarian's cruiser with its lights on, but no other vehicles. Another officer arrived and saw Miktarian on the ground next to his cruiser. Miktarian had no vital signs when emergency medical services arrived. Thompson's driver's license and insurance card were in Miktarian's front shirt pocket. Twinsburg police enlisted the assistance of other local law enforcement to locate Thompson. Around 2 o'clock a.m., the Bedford Heights Police Department received notice that Thompson had a prior address in their jurisdiction on Cambridge Drive, so 3 officers went to investigate. They saw 3 people, 2 women and 1 man standing in the driveway. The officers began to question Bridget Robinson, who's Thompson's sister. While Officer Vanek was inquiring about Thompson's whereabouts, he hears a loud noise inside the house. He realizes that the other woman, who was later identified as his girlfriend, Danielle Robertson, had left the driveway. Officer Vanek approaches the house. He opens the screen door, and he sees Thompson standing in the kitchen with a pair of handcuffs hanging off of his right wrist. The officer confronts Thompson, and a struggle begins. Another officer seizes a 9mm handgun from the stovetop, and another arrests Thompson and takes him into custody. Later, forensic testing would confirm the presence of blood with a DNA profile consistent with Miktarian's DNA profile on Thompson's left shoe, watch band, and shirt, and on the barrel of the recovered gun. On the driveway of the crime scene unit, officers find a pair of Miktarian's handcuffs and his taser, which had been activated but not fired, and his handgun was still in the holster on his duty belt. Officers also recover a broken liquor bottle next to the sidewalk. Inside Thompson's home, they find a receipt documenting the purchase of a Kel-Tec 9mm handgun. The serial number of the gun on the receipt matched the number of the gun found at the house on Cambridge Drive. And subsequent ballistics testing would confirm the spent bullets and shell casings recovered from the crime scene had been fired from that gun. Thompson shot Miktarian 4 times before fleeing to his sister's house. He shot him once in the forehead and 3 more times on the side of the head. Officer Miktarian was flown to the nearest hospital where he was pronounced dead. Ashford Thompson was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder. Each count carries 3 death specifications: killing a law enforcement officer, killing to escape detention, killing while under detention. He was also charged with 2 counts of escape, 2 counts of resisting arrest, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, 1 count of carrying a concealed weapon. At the trial, Ashford Thompson's attorney argued that nothing before July 13, 2008 would suggest that 23-year-old Thompson would shoot Officer Miktarian. Thompson was a nurse and a caretaker. He had a licensed concealed weapon only because he did home health care in really bad neighborhoods. He was never convicted of anything violent before July 13th, and he was deeply religious. The defense argued that Thompson is a law-abiding, religious, mild-mannered, peaceful nurse. They suggest that what turned Thompson that night was fear when the traffic stop made by Officer Miktarian and Miktarian's dog in the cruiser started to get out of control, with the defense saying, quote, "In Ashford Thompson's mind, he was pulled over for a noise ordinance violation, something that is not an arrestable offense, and all of a sudden he ended up on the hood of a police car and he was handcuffed, and he saw the police officer reaching for what he thought was a gun, but he was reaching for his taser." The state's attorney agrees that alcohol and anger may have played a role, but goes on to say, whoever Thompson was prior to July 13, 2008 doesn't change the fact that he fled that traffic stop as a cop killer.
Twinsburg officer Joshua Miktarian was gunned down during a traffic stop in July of 2008. Today, opening statements began in the trial of suspect Ashford Thompson. Summit County Bureau reporter Bob Jones is live on 5 outside the Summit County Courthouse with what happened in court today. Bob?
Well, Lee, in court today, no one is arguing that Ashford Thompson shot and killed Officer Josh Miktarian, the first Twinsburg officer to ever be killed in the line of duty. Today, the prosecution started building its death penalty case, while the defense is trying everything it can do to spare his life. During his opening statement, Assistant Prosecutor Brian Loprinzi told the jury the final words Officer Josh Miktarian radioed in before his murder. All painful memories for his widow, Holly, also a police officer.
Start Reminderville on its way. I need backup. Those are the last words Officer Josh Miktarian was heard saying.
Prosecutors say Ashford Thompson, who had been pulled over for playing loud music around 2 in the morning, shot Officer Miktarian 4 times on July 13, 2008.
There was a contact bullet hole in his forehead and 3 more bullet holes on the side of his head.
Police found Thompson at his sister's home in Bedford Heights. Officer Miktarian's handcuff was still on his wrist, and the murder weapon was found on a stove.
They tested the gun for DNA, and it came back with no surprise blood on it from Josh Miktarian.
Defense attorneys admit Thompson is the killer, but they're hoping for a murder conviction instead of aggravated murder.
Ashford Thompson, that person right there, took out a gun. With that gun, he shot Officer Josh Miktarian.
A witness named Stephen Bartz testified he saw an apparent drunk Thompson at a bar about an hour before the killing and overheard Thompson saying some disturbing things to a woman sitting next to him.
I will kill any that threatens me.
And the next statement.
Nobody understands the I've done and capable of doing.
During dramatic and disturbing testimony that included a mannequin and the murder weapon, a state crime investigator demonstrated how close Ashford Thompson would have been to Josh Miktarian when the Twinsburg officer was murdered.
If I'm going to shoot you here like this is important that the gases out of the barrel are going to push the blood backwards.
Miktarian was shot in the head 4 times after he pulled over Thompson for playing loud music around 2 in the morning in July of 2008. Investigators say blood was found on Thompson's shoes, which were no more than 12 to 16 inches from the fallen police officer.
Again, I've got this spatter that's telling me my orientation is somewhere along this angle here.
After calling 35 witnesses and showing 160 pieces of evidence, the prosecution rested. The defense may or may not call witnesses when the trial resumes on Tuesday. For the first time, Thompson's attorneys offered a possible reason for the tragedy, suggesting that Thompson saw the officer holding a weapon and mistook the officer's taser for his gun.
In the dark, say at 2 o'clock in the morning, could that weapon, that taser, be confused or mistaken for a deadly weapon, such as an officer's revolver or pistol?
I would think not, being yellow.
The jurors head into Memorial Day weekend, knowing it will soon be up to them to decide Thompson's fate. In Akron, Bob Jones, News Channel 5.
Danielle Robertson testifies that on July 13th, Thompson and his friend picked her up at her mother's house a little after midnight. After dropping off the friend, her and Thompson go to Rav's bar. She says that Thompson drank half of a beer, and she does not recall him being angry or consuming any other additional alcohol that night. They leave the bar and head towards Thompson's house. She says that the officer pulled into the driveway behind them and then turned his lights on. She says that her and Thompson were starting to get out of the car, but they saw the officer approaching them, so they stayed back in the car. She says Officer Thompson walked up to the car and said, "Why are you running through my city with all that boom, boom, boom? I ought to rip all this shit out of your car." She goes on to say that Officer Miktarian told Thompson that he had been following him for 2.5 miles and asked why he didn't stop. Officer Miktarian takes Thompson's driver's license and insurance card and asked whether he had anything to drink. Danielle says that at some point, Thompson got out of the car, and when he did, Officer Miktarian slapped a handcuff on Thompson's right wrist, and Thompson somehow ended up on the ground. She goes on to say that Officer Miktarian threatened to let Baggio out of the car if Thompson tried anything, and that's when he reached for his belt. Then he slammed Thompson onto the hood of his cruiser over the side fender. Danielle says as she turned away, she saw the officer reach to his right side. Danielle goes on to say that that's when Thompson turns around and shoots Officer Miktarian in the forehead. Officer Miktarian falls, and Danielle goes on to say that she couldn't really see what was happening because the car was in her way, but she heard 2 more shots, and when she looked, Thompson was standing over Officer Miktarian when he fired those 2 shots. After this, Danielle says that Thompson told her to get back in the car, and that's when they drove to his sister's house.
A man accused of killing a Twinsburg police officer, Ashford Thompson, is charged with shooting Josh Miktarian in the summer of 2008. Today, the defense rested its case just after calling one witness, Thompson's girlfriend. News Channel 5 Summit Bureau reporter Bob Jones has the latest from court.
Ashford Thompson's girlfriend, Danielle Roberson, did not want her face shown during her testimony today. She is the only witness to the murder of Twinsburg police officer Josh Miktarian.
Did you see Ashford Thompson shoot the officer?
Yes.
Where did Ashford shoot the officer first, if you recall?
I believe the forehead.
Then, what does Ashford do, if anything?
He shot 2 more times.
Roberson said she knew Thompson had a gun but didn't see it on the night of the killing. Roberson testified she was a passenger in Thompson's car when he got stopped for playing loud music. She said Miktarian put a handcuff on Thompson outside of the car, and then the officer started pushing him towards the cruiser.
What happens after this?
He comes and slams him on the hood of the car.
Who does who what?
Miktarian actually slams Ashford on the hood of the car.
Prosecutors said Roberson never mentioned that to police when she was questioned hours after the murder. Today, Roberson said the shooting happened after Officer Miktarian reached to his right side.
Are you suggesting that at some point you did fear for your life?
I didn't fear for my life. I feared for Ashford's life.
If the jury convicts Thompson, he could get the death penalty.
My life changed in a matter of a few minutes. So.
Just a matter of hours before you saw your boyfriend shoot a police officer.
Correct.
27-year-old Danielle Roberson and 37-year-old Bridget Robinson both apologized to Officer Miktarian's widow at the trial.
I am very deeply sorry for the loss of that police officer, and I want to say, Holly, that I am sorry for your loss, but I had nothing to do with his death at all. If I could go back and I could change that night, I would, but I had nothing to do with it, and I'm sorry that it happened. I do want to say that I do have 3 children, and that I have worked hard all my life to keep my record clean. Yes, I did love Ashford. I did love Ashford, but I would never do anything to help him escape from a tragedy like this. I would never do that. I was terrified that night. I have been haunted by this nightmare for the past 4 years of my life, thinking about it constantly every day. I have never been in a situation like this, and I didn't know how to react. He told me to get in the car that night, and he had a gun, and as my attorney stated, he just murdered somebody. I was terribly afraid. So I did what he asked me to do, which was get in the car. I never tried to help him escape.
And he drove to his sister's house?
Yes.
Did you attempt to remove the gun from the automobile?
Yes, I did, but the only reason that I did that is because he was making statements relative to the fact that he wanted to hurt himself, and I didn't want that to happen. That is the only reason that I moved the gun.
And where did you move the gun to?
When I had never been to Bridget's house prior. Me and Bridget didn't have a relationship prior to this incident. I had been to her house one time, and I didn't really know the layout of her house. The way her house is set up, the garage is attached to the house, and when I came into the house, the living room, you walk straight into the living room, and then it was a set of stairs. When I didn't want him, the whole purpose of me moving the gun was for him to not get to it. When I came in the house, he was coming down the stairs, so I just tried to hurry up and shove it in some laundry, which when he when he sat down on the couch, he felt it, and that is how he got back to it. I never tried to hide a gun from the police. I told the police that I was there. They didn't even know I was there, because I wanted to be honest about everything, and I have complied with everything they asked me to do from day one.
And you testified at trial, right?
Yes, I did.
And you testified that the officer did not use any obscenities or make any racial comments, correct?
Well, yes.
Okay. You think he may have been rude, but he did not use any obscenities or make any racial comments. You indicated that Ashford had been drinking prior to the stop, and you testified at trial in Summit County.
Correct.
All right. How old was Ashford L. Thompson, as far as you know?
How old is he now?
How old was he at the time of the incident?
About 22, I believe.
22.
I believe.
And how long had you known him?
At that time, I met him in 2006, and this happened in about 2 years, 2008.
Ever see him involved in any other acts of violence?
No. No.
What was his demeanor like, when he got back in the car?
I mean, he was crying and he was upset.
He was crying and he was upset?
Mm-hmm.
Did he remain upset as he drove to his sister's house?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. You may remain seated. You may be seated.
Make sure you speak up. As a
very, very sorry for the loss of your husband. When my brother came to my house that night, I really didn't understand what was going on. Honestly, there were two people in the house that knew what happened, and then there was me. Neither one of them told me what happened. He told me on the phone he shot an officer. It was in the middle of the night. It was something that I never heard, never fathomed that I would hear before. And I just didn't know. He called 60 seconds before he got to my house. I didn't even have time to process what he said. And in reference to the handcuffs, I simply reacted when he came in the house and asked for Vaseline. He didn't say what it was for, and I didn't ask. I hadn't fully laid eyes on him to even assess the situation. After giving him the Vaseline and knowing what he wanted to use it for, I tried to tell him not to do that. I took the Vaseline from him and other items and begged him to turn himself in for whatever it was he was trying to run from. I didn't realize the situation was as terrible as it was. Nobody told me anything past what he said on the phone. I had very limited information. He asked me to get Danielle home, and that's why I was giving her my vehicle, not him. He had agreed to turn himself in if she got home. I love my brother. He'll always be my brother, but that does not mean I condone decisions and actions that he made. I wasn't there that night. I don't know everything that transpired in my mother's driveway between your husband and my brother, but your husband did not deserve that. It was never my intention to try to help him flee or otherwise. I wish I had asked more questions and just directed him to go to Beckler Heights Police Station. I don't know. But I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for his mom's loss. And I'm sorry for your daughter's loss. And also the loss of Twinsburg Police Station.
They both received 2 years probation and 1 year suspended prison terms. Danielle Robertson also received 6 months of house arrest. After a 5-day trial, a jury convicted Thompson of both aggravated murder counts and all associated specifications. Thompson was also convicted of escape, resisting arrest, tampering with evidence, and carrying a concealed weapon. The court merged the 2 aggravated murder convictions and 2 of the 3 death specifications for the mitigating hearing and sentencing. The jury unanimously recommended a sentence of death, and the court agreed with the jury's recommendation and sentenced Thomas to death for 1 count of aggravated murder, with 2 death specifications: purposely killing a police officer and killing to escape detection. The trial court also merged the 3 counts of tampering with evidence. The court went on to impose the following sentences for the remaining counts, with all sentences to be served concurrently with each other, except for the terms for the firearms. 7 years for the merged firearm specifications to be served consecutively to the other sentences. 12 months for escape, 18 months for felony resisting arrest, 90 days for misdemeanor resisting arrest, 5 years for tampering with evidence, and 12 months for carrying a concealed weapon.
Jury deliberations are over. Jurors have reached a verdict in the murder of Twinsburg officer Josh Miktarian. News Channel 5 Summit County Bureau reporter Bob Jones has been following this case since it began, and he joins us now live with the breaking details. Bob.
Well, Alicia, guilty on all counts. That was the verdict announced just a short time ago. In fact, within the hour here at the Summit County Courthouse. Again, all counts for Ashford Thompson, including the aggravated murder of Twinsburg police officer Josh Miktarian. Thompson sat stone-faced with his arms crossed, showing no emotion as the verdict was read. He was actually convicted of 2 counts of aggravated murder, one for killing a police officer and another for fleeing while committing the crime. In July of 2008, after Thompson was pulled over for playing loud music in Twinsburg, he pulled a 9mm handgun from his pocket and shot Officer Miktarian in the head 4 times. Miktarian's widow, Holly, was in the courtroom today, as were several Twinsburg police officers. After the verdict was announced, they hugged each other and there were many tears, but no one commented because there is a gag order in the case and the case is not over yet. The same jury that convicted Thompson will return to the courtroom next Thursday for the penalty phase and decide if he should live or die for his crime. But again, Ashford Thompson today convicted on all counts, including the aggravated murder of Twinsburg police officer Josh Miktarian.
I guess softly maligned by the defendant in his statement and through his defense, leading everybody to believe that this officer must have done something wrong in order for offended. Then excuse me.
Who would like to speak on behalf of the family?
God has given me many gifts. One was my youngest son, Josh. Josh was a very special person. It took me many months to pick out his name to fit him, bringing out the goodness in people. I feel your mother did not raise a killer, but you turned into a killer that night. You put the gun to my son's head and pulled the trigger, killing him. And that wasn't good enough. You had to shoot him 3 more times while he laid down there dead, caving in the side of his head. The shot that took his life also took mine. I'm dead inside. I'm like a shell going through the motions of life. I respond to my body's command. When I have to eat, when my body says that, whatever. You took my future too. My eyes drip tears anytime, day or night. I don't even notice half the time. I go like this and I'm crying. My heart bleeds sorrow for grief, sadness, agony. You took my son's future. You took my future.
Although it's very rare in this state, the legislature has empowered the court.
I want him back with his wife. I want him back with his little girl.
Ashford, I am Josh's wife. I stand up here to represent his family, his fellow officers in blue, and his daughter. And look at his daughter right there. Those are his eyes. They're not my eyes. They're his eyes looking at you. One picture is him and I holding her, and the other picture is her holding him. 23 long months we played this game. We could have done this a lot sooner and tried to ease our pain a lot sooner, but you played games. I listened to your phone call conversations last night. This is an act that you had up here. An act. You're not sorry. And I don't believe that at all. Those phone call conversations where you said you would do it again if you had the chance, or I know I'm wrong for doing this, but he made me do it. There is no but. He was a police officer. And with my experience in law enforcement, I know in my heart that he did everything right that night. You wanted to be in control. You were in your driveway and you wanted to be in control. Just like you talked to your girlfriend on the phone. You want to be in control, and that's how it is. I would say I feel sorry for your family, but I've heard them respond to you in those phone call conversations. And they don't care, just like you don't care. So I'm not as nice as his mother, because I don't believe that they care. Those phone call conversations are disgusting. How can you believe in God? How can you even think that God can forgive you for what you've done? You shot my husband in the head. And I believe with all my heart, your girlfriend getting out of the car that night gave you that 2 seconds to get that gun out of your pocket and shoot him in the head. And then you bent over And you shot him again and again and again. You put the gun on his head. That's disgusting. Who does that?
And let me begin by telling you that we're terribly sorry for your loss.
Thank you, sir. I didn't write anything down here because I don't really think that I can write my life down and tell these two women how they destroyed my life that day. Bridget Robinson and I went to school together. And here I am addressing her in court as a part of someone who helped my husband, helped someone murder my husband. I understand that he's your brother and that you want to help him, but you as an adult made that choice that day to help him, and that is why you're here. I don't believe for a fact that you were just in your car, out in your driveway, cleaning your car for no reason. You were going to help him escape after he murdered my husband. Those Bedford Heights officers that arrived at your house that day, they could have been hurt because of you. There could have been more officers killed and more families affected, and it could have been a bad, even worse day than it had already turned out to be. Daniel Roberson, you're the reason why my husband is dead. You got out of that car on a traffic stop, and you should have never done that. Ultimately, I blame you for distracting my husband. He was in the middle of an arrest doing his job, and you got out of that car and you distracted him, and that is how Ashford Thompson was able to shoot his gun. And I solely blame you and believe with all my heart that you are the reason why my husband missed Ashford going for his gun. Then you have the nerve to stand up here in front of a judge and say that you don't remember everything from that day. How do you not remember the execution of a human being? How do you not remember every single minute of that situation? And you're in the medical field, and you just left my husband there like an animal to die on the side of the road. You didn't stop to try and help him. You didn't run to try and get help. No, you got back in the car with your man. It didn't matter who Josh was. It didn't matter to you. My little girl has to go to a cemetery to sing happy birthday to her dad. And I want you to think about that. She sees a flag and she says, "Look, Mommy, it's Daddy's flag." I solely blame you for his death. Even though you didn't pull the trigger, but I believe you're the reason why he's dead. I hate that after all these years I have to relive all this again. And you have the nerve, both of you, to ask for misdemeanors after a man, a human being, and a police officer was murdered the way he was. Obviously, with the show of support here, we will never forget Josh. And we promise you we will never forget him. And that's all.
Miktarian, thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate you being with us here today.
I just want to say I'm sorry. I can't apologize enough.
He killed a local police officer, but will an apology today be enough to save his life? Twinsburg police officer Joshua Miktarian was gunned down nearly 2 years ago.
And today, the man who pulled the trigger and shot Officer Miktarian to death took the stand to save his own life. Earlier this month, jurors found Ashford Thompson guilty of shooting Officer Miktarian in July of 2008. Today, the sentencing phase of Thompson's case began. News Channel 5's Deborah Lee is live on 5 outside the Summit County Courthouse in Akron. And Deb, jurors now have the case.
Yes, they've had the case for a couple of hours now. Now, today, Ashford Thompson presented a team of witnesses to vouch for his character, but none was as compelling or emotional as Thompson himself when he spoke to his victim's family.
I just want to say I'm sorry. I can't apologize enough.
It was a remorseful Ashford Thompson standing before the family of Twinsburg police officer Josh Miktarian today, saying that he understands his apology won't bring their loved one back. Thompson has admitted shooting and killing Miktarian during a traffic stop 2 years ago because he believed the officer was reaching for his gun to shoot him. Today was the first time Thompson has displayed this kind of emotion. He said he's been keeping a stern face on the advice of his attorney.
If you see me with a straight face, it's not because I just have no feeling or I just hate people. I'm just some kind of cold-blooded killer. I wasn't raised like that.
Earlier, Thompson's family and friends, most who refused to be photographed, described him as a caring and compassionate man who had once considered going into the ministry. But prosecutors see a different Ashford Thompson, and they're hoping the jury will too.
And he killed an officer for doing his duty. Are you going to honor Mr. Thompson, or are you going to honor the law with that badge?
Now, again, this is the same jury that convicted Thompson last week, now is deliberating, deciding his fate. They have 4 choices. They can send him to prison for 25 years to life, or for 30 years to life, or they can send him to prison without any chance of parole, or they can decide death. And of course, we are in the courtroom and we will be there until their decision is announced. Live in Akron.
Just a short while ago, it was the first time Holly had the chance to speak since her husband was killed during a traffic stop in July of 2008. She spoke of the pain she and her young daughter feel on a daily basis as a result of the brutal and senseless murder. Prior to Holly, Josh's mother told Thompson he didn't just take Josh's life that night, he took hers as well. She laid into Thompson for shooting daggers at her, she said, with his eyes during the trial, and asked him if he had anything to say now. He did not. When given his chance, Thompson just simply read from the Bible for 15 minutes, then asked for forgiveness. The jury recommended death, but in the end, it was the judge's decision.
Therefore, the court concurs with the jury's sentence and hereby sentences Ashford Thompson on merged counts 1 and 2 to death for the aggravated murder of Joshua Miktarian.
Now, the judge set an execution date of 1 year from today, June 23rd, 2011. The show of support from police officers here, absolutely amazing.
Thompson is currently still on death row, and his execution date has been suspended indefinitely until he exhausts every single one of his appeals.